So good day everyone. So we are Group 4 and we are here to share some details about the contemporary global governance with integration of COVID-19. Learning outcomes. Students should be able to gain understanding about the challenges of global amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, enumerate the effects of globalizations and governments. Third, identity the institution that govern international relations. Lastly, differentiates internationalism from globalization. What is global governance? Global governance is to negotiate solutions to issues that affects multiple states or regions. Global governance can be seen as a solution to problems brought on by the world's growing interconnectedness as well as the necessity and significance of process to establish laws, rules, or regulation controlling political, economic, and social and cultural issues that are to be applied globally. The term management of international affairs refers to global governance. Since there is no single worldwide government, global governance often incorporates a variety of actors such as states as well as regional and global organizations. A single institutions such as the World Trade Organizations in matters of international trade may be ostensibly granted the lead position on a matter, though as a result of global governance is understood to be a process of reaching consensus at the worldwide level. The result in directives and agreements that have an impact on both national governments and multinational enterprises.
Decadec Ronald Julius B. Blanco. With the integration of COVID-19 pandemic, gain understanding about challenges of global amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. In times of crisis such as current COVID-19 pandemic and its economic and social repercussions, public governance matter and more than ever. Governance arrange have played a critical role in new normal on once the crisis has passed. So, where was COVID-19 first discovered? The first known infections from SARS, or also known as COVID virus, were discovered in Wuhan, China. Source of viral transmission to human remains unclear, as thus whether the virus became pathogenic before or after the spoiler event. So, what is COVID-19? Coronavirus disease or COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus. Most people fall sick with COVID-19 will experience mild to moderate symptoms and recover without specific treatment. However, some become seriously ill and require medical attention. However, some died. So, public trust. In this pandemic, the government need the public trust. If you have not yet been vaccinated, I truly hope you will consider doing as soon as possible. For yourself, for your loved ones, and for those also help your government to raise as pandemic hit us and to follow the new life as pandemic is still on.
The effects of globalization on governments. According to the disciplining hypothesis, globalization restrains governments by inducing increase of budgetary pressure. So, it makes local politicians less important by reducing their capacity to effect change on behalf of local communities. Just as local media have suffered from growing impacts of social media giants such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, and etc. So, global governance may seem great to some, but it will gradually turn into biorobots or cyborgs stored away in containers until needed to fight the battles of the leader, just as so many political leaders like Napoleon and Hitler did in Europe and Mao did in China, destroying everything and killing millions of people. That's the real threat we are facing from the climate change and COVID-19 nonsense, of which impacts are begin at worst, but of which political impacts and destroying the global economy and people lives as well as assets and income they rely on their retirement. What is happening is anarchy and extreme target caused by the social left of politics and doing what communists tried to do but they failed at the cost of millions of people of lives. Positive impacts of globalization. One, give access to a larger market. So through globalization, countries and companies have access to a bigger consumer base. Instead of only selling products in their country, a business can expand to other regions, boosting sales and other process making more money. Number two, provide cheaper goods for consumers. Because of the globalization, a lot of companies are moving to areas where their cost of production is low. They in turn offer cheaper products, and because they are not expensive to make, hence lower prices for consumers. Number three, globalization lets countries do what they do best. For example, a country can buy cheap steel from another country instead of making its own steel. They can then focus their efforts on making their things they are good in computers and export them from the countries and they import from steel from. Number four, leads to better economies with many multinations heading to Africa to top in consumer base and part of the world. More jobs are being created, helping people in these countries get better wages and improve their standards of living. Number five, promote world peace and unity. Globalization brings governments together so they can tackle common goals together. And number six is innovation. The desire to make a profit has always been a spark to expanded trade, innovation, and the communication of ideas. Number seven, better quality and variety. So competition from different countries derives from to improve their products. Consumers have better quality products and more variety as a result. And these are the negative impacts of globalization. Number one, causing environmental damage. Globalization has led to increase the production for business in order to meet global demand. Increased production means more natural resources are used, and this can be used up before they're regenerated, leading to a negative impact of the environment. Number two, causes fluctuation of prices. So this is a serious increased competition means that the business with the best prices win. Due to competition, prices are always fluctuation. For example, a country like US has to reduce its prices often to compete with prices for the same product coming from China. And the last is the job insecurity. Globalization provides a double-edged sword when it comes to jobs. It creates jobs for people in developing countries who provides cheaper manufacturing jobs. For example, many companies are setting up in India and China because wages and manufacturing jobs are cheaper there, which means fewer opportunities in developed world.
Identify the institutions that govern international relations. These are the institutions that govern international relations and are led over time to develop power and influence to shape the foreign policy of individual states like United Nations or UN, World Trade Organizations WTO, and lastly is the International Court of Justice. United Nations. The United Nations is an intergovernmental organization whose aim is to maintain international peace and security and friendly relations between both of the nations, achieve international cooperation, and be a center of harmonization of nations' actions. In addition of the United Nations, it has main bodies, which is the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, and last is the Secretariat. The General Assembly is the main deliberative, policy-making, and representative organ of the UN. The Security Council has primary responsibility under the UN Charter for the maintenance of international peace and security. The Economic and Social Council is the principal body for coordination, policy review, policy dialogue, and recommendation on economic, social, and environmental issues, as well as implementation of international agreed development goals. While the Secretariat comprises the Secretary General and tens of thousands of international UN staff, members who carry out the day-to-day work of the UN as mandated by the General Assembly and the organization's other principal boundaries. These are the other institutions that govern international relations, specified agencies in other organizations, in UN specified agencies. The World Trade Organizations, or WTO, is the only global international organizations dealing with the rules of trade between nations. At its heart are the WTO agreements negotiated and signed by the Book of the World's Trading Nations and ratified in their parliaments. The goal is to help producers of the goods and services, exporters, and importers conduct their business. The International Court of Justice, also known as the World Court, is the main judicial organ of the UN. The International Court of Justice is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. Its seat is at the Pace Palace in Hague.
I am Cadet Beltran Jericho S. I am going to differentiate internationalism from globalism. Introduction to internationalism is political, economic, and cultural cooperation between nations. It is associated with the other political movements and ideologies, but can also reflect a doctrine, belief systems, or movement itself. Next slide is Introduction to Globalism. Is an ideology based on the belief that people, goods, and information ought to be able to cross national borders unfettered. Differentiating internationalism and globalism. Although the two terms may appear to be similar, yet there exists conceptual difference between the two. Internationalism lays stress on the solidarity and cooperation among the nations while acknowledging their sovereign country. Internationalism is when either a few or many countries are agreed to work together for the good of all. Modern expression, internationalism is most commonly expressed as an appreciation for a diverse culture in the world and a desire of world peace. People who express this belief is not only being a citizen of the respective countries, but of a being citizen of the world. While on the other hand, globalism is much more wider terms of its meaning, scope, and outcome. A national policy of treating the whole world is a proper sphere for political influence. Compare imperialism, internationalism. Globalism is political ideology that puts interests of the world above those of individual nations. This brings commitments to free trade in goods, services, and factors of production, capital, and labor. Globalism can be further explained in terms of economic, military, environmental, and socio-cultural. Globalism towards an interconnected and interdependent world.
To maintain international peace and security, prevention and removal of threats to the peace for the suppression of acts of aggression or of breaches of peace, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for principle or equal rights and self-determination of people, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. To achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and promoting and encouraging respect of human rights and fundamental freedom for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, and religion. Humanitarian aid is seen as a fundamental expression of universal value and solidarity between people and moral imperative. Humanitarian aid comes from either local or international communities. In reaching out to international communities, the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, of the United Nations, is responsible for coordination responses to emergencies. For international law, it is firm given the rules which govern relationship between states, despite the absence of any superior authority to enforce such rules. International law is considered by the state as binding upon them, and it is fact which gave these rules the status of law. Unlike national or domestic law, international law is not set down in any legislation approved by Parliament. Even multilateral treaties do not apply to all states, but only to those which have consisted to be so bound by signing and ratifying or acceding to them. As a result, the precise rules of international law are often more difficult to identify than national law. Mediation brings out real issues and enhance communication between the parties, fostering an improved working relationship. International commercial arbitration is an alternative method resolving disputes between private parties arising out of transactions conducted across national boundaries that allows the parties to avoid legislation in national courts.
The challenges of global governance in the 21st century. The complexity of these issues is overwhelming the ability of global governance institutions and national governments to manage. Globalization by itself has increased the scope of any problem that would affect a single nation or region. These are the challenges of global governance in the 21st century. First, systematic risk. Second, change in perceptions by some of emerging nations. Third, climate change. Fourth, poverty, and the last one is violent conflicts. Systematic risk. With the increased complexity of the issues facing the globe and now the interdependence growth in the 21st century, the government has been challenged a great deal. The 2018 to 2019 financial crisis was an illustration of just how much globalization is affecting global governance. The crisis evidenced the failure of governance institutions to pace up with globalization. Change in perceptions by some of the emerging nations. These emerging nations are coming up with new ideas and perspectives on how globe should be governed. China, for example, feels that America has been a lead country for quite a while and think that other developing countries should be allowed to take the lead on globe matters. Their main argument is that as a world hegemon, the United States has foregone the democratic principle that governs the globe and with all the power in the world for itself. For this reason, China is slowly withdrawing its involvement from the international community and prefers to deal with its issues from the internal point and not by the consensus encouraged by the global governance institutions. India has a belief that existing international organizations are not functioning adequately in the sense that they are controlled by the Western countries, which are already developed. The country feels that Asia as a region is faced with quite a number of issues that require global attention, but this is not so. Global governance, as per India's belief, is a channel for enacting the interests of the Western nations. Climate change. Climate change is a problem facing the whole globe, and therefore the global governance institutions need to seek ways to ensure that we adapt to the changing climate and mitigate the effect of industrial development on the environment. Doing this is what poses the main challenge to global governance in this 21st century. At the time, Around two-thirds of the countries around the globe are still developing. Implementation of policies that mitigate the effects of the industrialization of the world means slowing down the development rate of these third world countries. The fund is aimed at initiating sustainable and eco-friendly development in the states and hence mitigating the effects of industrialization on the government. However, looking at the number of developed countries and comparing them to the percentage of those still developing, the fund which is being donated by the developed countries and some of the international organizations might be much changed to the global climate crisis.
The challenges of global governance in the 21st century. The four challenges of global governance in the 21st century is poverty. Around 80% of the number of countries around the globe are still developing, meaning that the economies in these countries are still not stable. Since the Second World War, different countries have been struggling to overcome the effects of the wars and stabilize their economies. The development aid was aimed to promoting development in the countries that had just attained independence. The development aid provided to most of these countries is rather insufficient in cushioning the shocks that are experienced continuously in the world market. States have, over time, become dependent on the aid they get from the developed nations. Global governance is faced with the challenge of trying to counter poverty in most countries in these countries. The fifth challenges of global governance in the 21st century is violent conflicts. The establishment of the global governance institutions was meant to solve the global crisis, especially those that would lead to the occurrence of a third world war. Conflict resolution was one of the main objectives behind the idea of global governance. The world has not experienced any global physical war, but there have been regional conflicts and multiple civil wars in most countries. Competition between developed countries over market segments and global influence has brought the tension that the world is currently facing. Liberia, for example, has experienced over 20 years of civil wars that have taken 15 years of intervention from the United Nations to end. The fact that states are continually developing their weapons shows that the globe is at risk of experiencing a third world war.
Good day everyone, I am Cadet Lantixi and today we will be talking about the relevance of state amidst globalization. First off, what is globalization and state and how does these two connected to each other? Globalization is the connection of different parts of the world resulting in the expansion of international, cultural, economic, and political services. State is a political community that occupies a definite territory. So, basically, this two runs the nation. This stabilizes the status and expands the connection of different states. Globalization is relevant when if we are talking about the aspect in life. For culture, it allows you to learn about other cultures and develop a wider cultural understanding through the improving internet and increased connection that allow you to be with people with different race and understand how their country works. Globalization has also helped create a flexible labor market which resulted to our economic status. It decreases the cost of manufacturing. This means that companies can offer goods at a lower prices to consumers. The average cost of goods is a key aspect that contributes to increase in the standard of living. Consumers also have access to a wider variety of goods. For politics, it reduces risk of invasion, more checks on big power and limitation on nationalism. International organizations are often committed to spread values like freedom and to fight abuses within countries. Smaller countries can work together within and gain more influence internationally. globalization is associated with rapid and significant human changes. The movements of people from rural to urban areas has accelerated, and the growth of cities in the developing world.
Today I'm Cadet Umambak Kent Harvey. We're going to tackle about the relevant state amid globalization. So the state is a distinctive political community with its own set of rules and practices, and that is more or less separate from other communities. It has four elements: people, territory, government, and sovereignty. So for people, the element it is the first element of state: permanent population. This population does not refer to a nomadic people that move from one place to another in different time. So for territory, this permanent presence in one location is strengthened by the second element of state. A territory has clear boundaries. A territory is effectively controlled by the third element, which is the government. For government, the government regulates relation among its own people and in other states. Sovereignty is the supreme authority within a territory. In any state, sovereignty is assigned to person, body, or institution that has the ultimate authority over the people in order to establish a law or change an existing law. Internationalism is a political principle that advocates greater political or economic cooperation among states and nations. It is associated with the political movements and ideologies, but can also reflect a doctrine, belief system, or movement in itself. For globalization is also creates sense of independence among nations, which could create an imbalance of power among nations of different economic strength. The role of the nation-state in a global world is largely a regulatory one as a factor in the global independence. Scientific study of interaction between sovereign states, the International Relation or IR, the International Studies or IS, International Affairs or IA. It examines all activities between states such as war, diplomacy, trade, and foreign policy, as well as relation with and among other international actors as intergovernment organization or IGOS, international non-government organization or INGOS, and international legal bodies and multinational corporation or the MNCs.
Hello. Today, we will talk about a very complex, partly contested, but nevertheless extremely important topic, which is global governance. So, what is global governance? In a very general understanding, it is the collective management of common transnational or global problems, those were created or exacerbated by globalization, and which cannot be managed at the nation state. Management of these problems is provided through a highly complicated, flexible, and loose systems of rules. So just to summarize this very general understanding of global governance, it is the management of problems which were created by globalization, management of these problems through rules, institutions, and processes, and management which involves both state and non-state actors. So now, what kind of problems global governance deals with? What are the problems that are created by globalization? Here's the example. First, we have global climate change and pollution of the environment. Next, we have poverty and management of economic development. Next, we have deficit of fresh water. Financial instability and management of financial markets. Global economic crisis and recession. Next, we have management of global trade and investment. Global energy market and their instability. Next in line, we have global migration. Pandemics such as the Ebola virus. Next, we have transnational terrorism. Lastly, transnational organized crime. Indeed, some of these problems are the direct product of globalization. This problem could not simply exist in the era before globalization. They were created by globalization. It is globalization who made them possible. The other problems that I have mentioned have different origin but they become a real problem of IR or international relations and security in conditions of globalization, such as poverty, starvation, or even civil, regional, and local war.